You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. And you certainly cannot fix a reality that you have spent 20 years meticulously constructing out of lies. I have sat in this chair for decades, looking into the eyes of people who are desperate, broken, and running out of road. I have seen every defense mechanism in the book. I have seen the criers, the screamers, the stonewallers, and the charmers. But the ones that really keep me up at night, the ones that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, are the ones who are calm. The ones who walk onto my stage with the poise of a news anchor, convinced that they can direct the narrative of their own intervention. They think they can outsmart the process, outsmart the audience, and frankly, outsmart me. They come here looking for validation, not resolution. They want me to hand them a gavel so they can pronounce a guilty verdict on their spouse, oblivious to the fact that I don't deal in verdicts, I deal in the ugly, messy, unvarnished truth. And when you invite me into your life, you better be ready for me to turn on the lights in the basement, because that is exactly where the monsters live. This particular case started like a standard chaotic domestic dispute, the kind we get thousands of emails about every single week. The subject line on the producer's brief simply read, "My husband is a monster and I need you to save us." The us referred to the wife Julianne and their 17-year-old son Caleb. Julianne was 45, a picture-perfect suburban mother from an affluent community in Connecticut. On paper, she was the victim of a tyrannical, volatile husband named Richard. According to her letters, and there were many, Richard was controlling, emotionally abusive, financially restrictive, and prone to fits of rage that left the household walking on eggshells. She claimed she had spent 2 decades trying to be the perfect wife, trying to soothe the beast, but she was at her breaking point. She wanted an exit strategy, and she wanted the world to know what she had endured. But here is the thing about human behavior. It follows patterns. It has a rhythm. And when the rhythm is off, when the music doesn't match the lyrics, my radar goes off. I watched the submission tapes before I ever met Julianne or Richard. In the video, Julianne sat in a pristine living room, not a pillow out of place. Her hair was done, her makeup was flawless, and her voice was a steady, melodic whisper. She spoke about Richard's terror with the same tone one might use to order a latte. There were no tears, no cracks in the facade, just a rehearsed recitation of grievances. She listed dates and times of his outbursts with forensic precision. Then I watched Richard's tape. He was filming from his car, looking disheveled, red-faced, clearly agitated. He was shouting into the phone camera, saying, "She's crazy! She's turning my son against me. I can't do anything right." To the untrained eye, Richard looked like the aggressor. He was loud, she was quiet, he was messy, she was composed. But I've been doing this long enough to know that volume does not equal guilt, and silence does not equal innocence. In fact, it is often the other way around. Richard didn't look like a predator to me. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked like a man who had been poked, prodded, and gaslit until he snapped. And then click, the camera was turned on just in time to catch the reaction, but not the provocation. I call it baiting. You poke the bear until it roars, and then you say, "Oh my, look how dangerous this bear is." I sat in the green room reviewing the notes with my team before the show. "What's the financial situation?" I asked. My producers told me Richard makes a healthy income as a contractor, but they are drowning in debt. Julianne claims Richard gambles it away. Richard claims he has no idea where the money goes because Julianne handles the books. That was the first red flag. Control freaks, which is what Julianne labeled, Richard rarely delegate the checkbook. If he was as controlling as she said, he would know where every dime was spent. The math wasn't adding up. Then there was the son, Caleb. We had spoken to him briefly. He was a shadow of a boy, withdrawn, anxious, repeating his mother's phrases almost verbatim. My dad is unsafe. My dad is a threat. It sounded scripted. It sounded like parental alienation, which is one of the most destructive forms of child abuse there is. When you turn a child into a weapon against the other parent, you are stripping that child of their identity and forcing them to carry your emotional baggage. It's poison. I walked out onto the stage, and the audience applause died down. I took my seat and looked over at Julianne. In person, the Ice Queen vibe was even stronger. She sat with her spine rigid, hands folded in her lap, a polite, frozen smile on her face. Richard sat on the other chair, leaning forward, knees bouncing, sweat on his brow. He looked ready to bolt. Julianne, I started skipping the pleasantries. You wrote to me saying that you are living in a war zone. You said, quote, Richard is a ticking time bomb who has stolen 20 years of my life. Those are strong words. Tell me what happened yesterday morning that made you decide you couldn't take one more day. Julianne nodded, a slow practice movement. Thank you, Dr. Phil. Yes. Yesterday, Richard couldn't find his car keys. He started screaming, throwing cushions off the sofa. He accused me of hiding them. He scared Caleb so much that the poor boy locked himself in the bathroom. I just stood there and prayed he wouldn't hit me. Did he hit you? I asked. He punched the wall right next to my head, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper for dramatic effect. I turned to Richard. Richard, did you punch the wall? Richard looked like he was about to explode. I didn't punch the wall. I slammed my hand on the counter and the keys were gone. Dr. Phil, they're always gone. My wallet, my phone, my keys. I put them in the bowl. I turn around and they vanish. She tells me I'm losing my mind. She tells me I have early onset dementia. I'm 48 years old. I'm not losing my mind. I'm being played. Julianne sighed. A sound of long-suffering patience. See, this is the paranoia I deal with. He forgets things, and then he creates these conspiracies that I'm sabotaging him. Why would I hide his keys? I want him to go to work. We need the money. Do you? I ask, leaning in. Do you need the money, Julianne? Of course, she blinked, unflinching. Richard has debts. We're going to get to the debts, I said, holding up a finger. But right now, I'm looking at the dynamic here. Richard, you say you're being played. Julianne, you say he's paranoid. But I'm looking at the police reports you filed, Julianne, 3 in the last 6 months. In every single one, the officers arrived and noted that Richard was agitated, but that there was no evidence of physical violence. Yet you insisted they file a report. Why is that? I want a paper trail, she said instantly. For when he finally kills me, it was a line I had heard in movies, delivered with theatrical gravity. It felt hollow. It didn't land in my gut the way genuine fear does. Genuine fear trembles. Genuine fear makes you shrink. Julianne wasn't shrinking. She was expanding. She was taking up all the oxygen in the room. You want a paper trail, I repeated, or do you want a narrative? Because there is a difference. A paper trail documents the truth. A narrative creates a reality that suits your agenda. And I have to be honest with you, Julianne. I'm looking at a man who looks beaten down, confused, and desperate to be heard. And I'm looking at a woman who looks like she's managing a PR campaign. The audience went quiet. Julianne's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. A flicker of something cold passed behind them. This was the moment I knew for sure. We weren't dealing with a bad marriage. We were dealing with a systematic dismantling of a human being. But to expose it, I had to get her to drop the script. I had to find the loose thread and pull until the whole sweater unraveled. And I had a feeling that the loose thread was buried in the one place she thought I wouldn't look. The past she claimed she was protecting her family from. Let's talk about the timeline, I said, shifting gears. You two met 20 years ago. You got married 3 months later. That is a sprint, folks. That is moving at the speed of light. Richard, you told my producers that when you met Julianne, she was a mystery, that she didn't talk about her family, didn't have old friends at the wedding. Is that true? Yeah, Richard said, rubbing his face. She said she was an orphan. Said her parents died in a car wreck when she was a kid, no siblings. She said she wanted to start fresh with me. I felt bad for her. I wanted to give her the family she never had. I turned back to Julianne. Is that true, Julianne? You have no family? She shifted in her seat. Just a fraction. That's right. It's just me, Richard, and Caleb. You see, I said, picking up a folder from the small table beside my chair, my team is very thorough. We don't just read the emails you send us. We dig. We look at public records. We look at birth certificates. We look at things that people think are buried under 20 years of dust. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. And it turns out, Julianne, that your parents didn't die in a car wreck. In fact, according to the obituary I'm holding right here, your mother passed away 4 years ago in Ohio. And your father, well, he's still alive. And you have a sister named Rebecca. Richard's head snapped up. He looked at me, then at his wife, mouth agape. What? Julianne's face went pale. The perfect mask didn't crack, but it froze. The color drained out of her cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax statue. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a studio audience when a foundational lie is exposed. It isn't the silence of confusion, it is the silence of collective breath holding. They knew, and I knew, that the ground beneath Richard's feet had just vanished. For 20 years, this man had operated under the belief that he was the sole protector of a woman who had no one else in the world. He had carried the weight of being her entire support system, her entire family tree. And in the span of 10 seconds, that reality was revealed to be a fiction. Julianne didn't panic. That's the hallmark of someone who has been playing a role for a very long time. An amateur liar would have stuttered, maybe cried, or tried to claim I had the wrong person. Julianne did none of that. She simply adjusted her posture, smoothing the fabric of her skirt, and looked at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment. Dr. Phil, she said, her voice steady but laced with a new, sharper edge. I didn't tell Richard about my family because they were toxic. My father was abusive. My sister, she has her own issues. I cut them out to protect our marriage. I wanted to start fresh. Is that a crime, to want to leave a painful past behind? It was a good pivot. It was calculated to elicit sympathy, to reframe her deception as an act of survival. But I wasn't buying what she was selling, and I could see Richard wasn't either. He was staring at her as if she were a stranger. You said they were dead, Richard whispered, his voice cracking. You didn't say you were estranged. You said you went to their funerals. You told me stories about the car crash. You cried on the anniversary of their deaths every single year, Julianne. I held you while you cried for people who were sitting in Ohio watching TV. I did what I had to do. She snapped at him, the mask slipping just an inch. You wouldn't have understood. You would have tried to fix it. You always try to fix things you don't understand. Let's be real clear here. I interjected, leaning forward. This wasn't about protection. This was about isolation. This is a classic maneuver. If you are an orphan, you are a blank slate. There is no one Richard can call to ask about your childhood. There is no one to contradict your version of history. By killing off your family, in his mind, you made yourself the sole source of truth in his world. You cut the phone lines before you even moved into the house. I picked up the folder again. And you didn't just cut ties, you erased them. But here is the problem with erasing the past. It has a nasty habit of showing up when you least expect it. We reached out to your sister, Rebecca. She had a very interesting reaction when we told her you were here painting Richard as a monster. Julianne's eyes narrowed. Rebecca is a liar. She's jealous. Is she? I asked. Because she sent us some documents. And she told us a story about a boyfriend you had back in college, a guy named Mark. Rebecca says you told the police Mark was stalking you. You got a restraining order? You told everyone he was dangerous? But then it turned out you were the one slashing his tires. You were the one calling his boss. Does that sound familiar? That's ancient history. Julianne scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. We were kids. It's a pattern, I said, my voice dropping an octave. It's a pattern of creating a villain so you can play the victim. And now you've cast Richard in the role of Mark, but the stakes are higher now, aren't they? You have a son involved. You have assets involved. I turned to Richard. Richard, tell me about the money. You said earlier that you're in debt because you're bad with money. That's the narrative in your house, right? You earn it, but somehow it disappears, and Julianne tells you that you spent it. Richard nodded, looking defeated. I make good money, Dr. Phil. I'm a contractor. I pull in 6 figures. But at the end of the month, the accounts are empty. Julianne handles the bills because, well, she says, I'm reckless. She says, I buy tools I don't need or I lose cash. She says, I have a gambling problem. Do you? I asked point blank. Do you gamble? I play poker with the guys maybe twice a year, he said. $50 buy-in. That's it. But she tells me I'm doing it online. She says I do it in my sleep or when I'm drunk. I don't even drink that much. But she shows me the bank statements, and the money is gone. So I started believing her. I thought maybe I am losing my mind. Maybe I am doing things I don't remember. This is gaslighting in its purest, most destructive form. It isn't just lying to someone, it's dismantling their ability to trust their own perception of reality. Richard had been convinced that he was the problem, that he was the leak in the boat, when in reality, he was the only one rowing. We took a look at those bank statements, I said, signaling to the screen behind us. The ones she shows you. A graphic appeared on the big screen. It showed a series of withdrawals. These are the statements Julianne shows you, I explained. They show withdrawals labeled casino or cash advance. But Richard, these aren't official bank records. These are typed up in Excel. They're forgeries. The audience gasped. Richard stood up halfway, then sat back down, his legs giving out. We subpoenaed the actual bank records. I continued, signaling for the next slide. Here is where the money actually went. It didn't go to a casino. It didn't go to tools. It went to an account under the name J. Miller. Miller is your maiden name, isn't it, Julianne? The name of the father who is supposedly dead? Julianne crossed her arms, her jaw tight. She didn't look at the screen. She stared straight at me, her eyes cold and hard as flint. I was saving it for when I left him. I told you he's dangerous. I needed a safety net. A safety net? I challenged. You have siphoned off nearly $200,000 over the last 7 years. You didn't take this money to flee a dangerous situation. You took it to cripple him. You kept him working like a dog, terrified that he was bankrupting his family while you were sitting on a mountain of cash. You made him feel guilty for buying a sandwich while you were hoarding his paycheck. Richard looked like he was going to be sick. I worked overtime, he mumbled, staring at the floor. I missed Caleb's baseball games because I thought we were broke. I worked weekends. I begged my boss for advances. I thought I was a failure. You are not a failure, Richard, I said firmly. You are a cash cow, and she has been milking you dry. Stop it, Julianne shouted, finally losing her cool. You're twisting everything. You don't know what it's like living with him. He screams. He throws things. Does he scream because he's crazy? I ask, voice rising. Or does he scream because he can't find his keys that you hid? Does he scream because his bank account is empty and he doesn't know why? Does he scream because he's being tortured psychologically in his own home? He's unstable, she shrieked. Ask our son. Ask Caleb. Caleb is afraid of him. We're going to talk about Caleb, I said. And the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Because that is the tragedy here. You haven't just stolen Richard's money and his sanity. You've stolen his relationship with his son. You have used that boy as a pawn in your game. You've coached him, haven't you? I have never coached him, she spat. Caleb sees the truth. We'll see about that, I said, because I spoke to Caleb backstage before the show. And let me tell you, children are loyal, but they are also observant. And 17-year-olds, they see a lot more than you think they do. Caleb is tired, Julianne. He's tired of being your bodyguard against a threat that doesn't exist. I looked at my producers. Bring him out. Julianne stiffened. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of Richard, but fear of losing the one ally she had cultivated for nearly 2 decades. She had built a fortress out of lies, and Richard was just the prisoner. But Caleb was the guard. And if the guard walked away, the whole prison would collapse. As Caleb walked onto the stage, head down, hands jammed into the pockets of his hoodie, the tragedy of the situation became visceral. He didn't look at his father. He didn't look at his mother. He looked like a kid who wanted to disappear. He sat in the middle chair, creating a physical barrier between his parents. Caleb, I said softly, I know this is hard. I know you love your mom, and I know you've been told a lot of things about your dad, but I want you to take a breath. You heard what we just talked about? About the family? About the money? Caleb nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on his sneakers. I didn't know about Grandma, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Mom told me she died before I was born. I did a school project on her once. I made up a whole story based on what Mom told me. He looked up first at Julianne, then fleetingly at Richard. Dad isn't always good, Caleb said. Navigating the minefield. He yells. It's scary when he yells. I know, I validated him. But Caleb, does he yell for no reason, or does he yell when things go missing? Caleb paused. He looked at his mother, who was staring at him with an intensity that bordered on hypnotic. She was willing him to stick to the script. Remember the plan, Caleb. Remember who protects you. He yells when he loses things, Caleb said quietly. And do those things just get lost? I asked. Or have you seen them somewhere else? The silence that followed was agonizing. This was the pivot point. The boy held the keys to the kingdom. If he lied to protect her, we were at a stalemate. If he told the truth, the war was over. I have seen adults crumble under that kind of pressure. I have watched hardened criminals and seasoned liars crack. But this was a child who had been trained for 17 years to see the world through his mother's distorted lens. I could practically hear the gears turning in that boy's head. He was running a risk-reward analysis in real time. If he tells the truth, he betrays the only parent he feels emotionally connected to, the parent who has convinced him she is his sole protector. If he lies, he condemns his father to this living hell and buries a part of his own soul in the process. It's an impossible choice. It's what we call a loyalty bind, and it is emotional torture. Caleb's eyes darted to his mother. Julianne gave him a look. It wasn't a glare. It was something far more insidious. It was a look of profound, preemptive disappointment. It was a look that said, "Don't do this to me. After everything I've sacrificed for you, don't you dare abandon me." Caleb took a shaky breath. Sometimes he started his voice so quiet the sound engineer had to push his levels up. Sometimes I see them, the keys. I saw them in Mom's purse once. After she said Dad lost them, I didn't say anything. Richard let out a sound, a gut-wrenching mix of a sob and a gasp. He leaned forward, his hands on his head, just rocking back and forth. "And the wallet?" I prompted gently. "What about the wallet Dad lost last month? The one that had the business credit cards in it, which made him lose that big bid?" Caleb flinched, the memory clearly painful. "I found it. It was in the back of her closet in a shoebox. With some of his old watches," she said, "had been stolen years ago. The dam broke. The confession came out in a torrent. She tells me to lock the door when he gets home. She tells me to record him with my phone when he starts getting loud. She tells me that he's an addict and we have to be careful. She told me the bruises on her arm last summer were from him grabbing her, but I saw her do it. She hit her arm on the kitchen counter over and over and then took a picture." Julianne stood up. "You are a liar," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her son. "How could you? How could you sit there and lie like that? He's gotten to you. Your father has poisoned you against me." "Sit down, Julianne," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. It was low, but it had steel in it. She stopped, but remained standing, her chest heaving. "Let me be crystal clear with you," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You do not get to do that. You do not get to turn on this child after you have used him as a human shield for 17 years. He is not the villain here. He is your victim. He is sitting here telling the truth for what is probably the first time in his life, and you have the audacity to call him a liar? That's called psychological projection. It's when you accuse someone else of the very thing you are guilty of." She sank back into her chair, but her eyes were daggers aimed not at me, but at her son. The betrayal she felt was palpable, but it wasn't the betrayal of a loving mother whose son has turned on her. It was the fury of a puppet master whose favorite puppet has just cut its own strings. I turned my full attention to Caleb. "Caleb, I want you to look at me. What you just did was one of the bravest things I have ever seen on this stage. It took courage, and I know it hurts. I know you feel like you just betrayed your mother. But what you did was save your father. And more importantly, you just saved yourself. Because the path you were on leads to one place: a lifetime of anxiety, depression, and an inability to trust anyone, including yourself." Richard got up from his chair, walked over to Caleb, and knelt in front of him. He didn't say a word. He just put his arms around his son, and for the first time, Caleb didn't flinch away. He leaned into his father's embrace and started to weep, not loudly, but with the quiet, exhausted sobs of someone who has been carrying a burden for far too long. This was the breakthrough. This was the moment the fog began to lift, but the work was far from over. Julianne was now in full-blown narcissistic rage. She had lost control of the narrative, she had lost control of her son, and she had been exposed. For a person with her personality structure, this is a fate worse than death. It is annihilation of the self-image she has so carefully constructed. "So this is it?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You're all against me now. The two of you and him," she sneered, gesturing at me. "I came here for help, and you've ambushed me. This is a setup." "This is not a setup, Julianne. This is an intervention," I corrected her. "You came here to get a stamp of approval on your story. You wanted me to co-sign your reality and tell you that Richard was the monster. But the evidence doesn't support that conclusion. The money trail doesn't support it. Your sister's story doesn't support it. And now your own son's testimony doesn't support it. The only person in this room still trying to sell that story is you." I let that sink in. We have to talk about what's really going on here. Because this behavior, this long-term calculated deception, this isn't just a bad habit. This points to a significant personality disorder. The lack of empathy, the constant need for admiration and control, the exploitation of others for personal gain, the pathological lying. These are classic traits of narcissistic personality disorder, and in your case, it presents in a very covert, malignant way. "I am not a narcissist," she retorted, her voice rising again. "I am a victim of abuse." "Are you?" I challenged. "Or are you the abuser who is an expert at playing the victim?" Because the evidence suggests the latter. You have systematically abused your husband emotionally, financially, and psychologically. And you have committed one of the worst forms of child abuse by alienating your son from his father and forcing him to be your co-conspirator. You have poisoned every relationship in your life with your lies, starting with the lie that your parents were dead. I turned back to the screen. "Let's talk about your father for a minute. Your sister told us that he wasn't abusive. She said he was strict, a former military man. She said you hated him because he saw right through you, because he was the one person you couldn't manipulate. So you ran away from home at 18 and you invented the story that he was a monster to justify it. You didn't cut him off to protect yourself. You cut him off to protect your lies." Julianne just stared at the floor, silent. The fight was gone. Not because she had accepted the truth, but because she was regrouping. She was processing the damage and calculating her next move. People like Julianne don't have epiphanies. They don't suddenly see the light. They simply see that their current strategy has failed and they need a new one. "Richard, Caleb," I said, addressing the two of them as they sat together, "this is day one. The healing process for both of you is going to be long and difficult. Richard, you have to reclaim your sanity and learn to trust your own judgment again. Caleb, you need intensive therapy to undo the damage of the parental alienation and to learn how to have a healthy, authentic relationship with both of your parents, if that's even possible." I looked at Julianne. "And you, Julianne, you have two choices. You can continue down this path, blow up this family completely, and end up alone because your son now knows the truth and will no longer be your accomplice. Or you can get intensive, long-term psychological help. You can start the painful process of dismantling this false self you've created and finding out who you really are underneath all the deception. But that requires a level of honesty and humility that I'm not sure you're capable of." The audience was completely silent. The raw, painful truth of this family's life was laid bare on the stage. There was no easy answer. There was no magic pill I could give them. The destruction was too deep, the patterns too ingrained. "We need to get you out of that house, Richard," I said. "You and Caleb tonight. My team has arranged for a place for you to stay. You cannot go back into that environment. It's toxic. Julianne needs to be alone to face the consequences of her actions." "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes for the first time. The thought of being left alone in her perfect, empty house was clearly terrifying. The audience was gone. The actors had left the stage. "You're supposed to get help," I said. "We have a list of specialists in your area who deal with severe personality disorders. The first step is to call one of them. The choice is yours. But I promise you this, your family's life as you know it is over. The only question is whether you are going to be a part of the new one they build." She didn't answer. She just sat there, isolated in the world she had created, a queen on a throne of lies in a kingdom that had just evaporated into thin air. It was a sobering, tragic sight. You can build the most beautiful house in the world, but if the foundation is made of lies, it will eventually collapse. And the collapse is never pretty. It is always loud, messy, and devastating. When the show wrapped and the applause faded, the energy in the studio shifted instantly. The bright lights of television were replaced by the harsh, fluorescent reality of the aftermath. There's a quiet efficiency to how my team moves in these moments. It's a well-oiled machine designed to de-escalate and manage the emotional shrapnel. Julianne, Richard, and Caleb were escorted off the stage in 3 different directions, each to a private green room. This separation is critical. It prevents the conflict from reigniting backstage and gives each person a moment to breathe, or in Julianne's case, a moment to reload. I went to my office first, just off the stage. My executive producer, Carla, followed me in. "How's she doing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Carla sighed, running a hand through her hair. "She's a block of ice. Refused the water we offered. Refused to speak to our on-site therapist. She just sat there and said, 'Get my purse. I need my lawyer's number.' Then she accused us of splicing the bank statements and coercing her son." It was textbook. When the narrative is destroyed, the narcissist's next move is to attack the credibility of the person who destroyed it. It wasn't her fault, it was my fault. I had an agenda. The show was a sham. Her son was a brainwashed traitor. In her mind, the meticulous construction of her victimhood was being rewritten, not as a fiction, but as a conspiracy against her. She wasn't just losing a husband, she was losing her entire identity. And she would rather burn the world down than admit she was the one holding the match. "Okay," I said, "let her sit. Don't engage. If she asks for her lawyer, give her a phone. We have nothing to hide. Make sure Richard and Caleb are in the large family suite. I'm going in there now." When I walked into their green room, the scene was heartbreaking. Richard was sitting on the edge of the sofa, staring at the blank television screen on the wall. He wasn't seeing the screen, he was seeing the last 20 years of his life replaying in his head, but this time with the correct audio track. The confusion, the self-doubt, the feeling of going crazy, it was all snapping into focus, and the picture it created was one of profound betrayal. It's one thing to be lied to, it's another thing entirely to realize your entire reality was a carefully curated stage play, and you were the only one who didn't have a script. Caleb was huddled in a chair in the corner, his knees pulled up to his chest, scrolling aimlessly through his phone. He was dissociating, trying to escape the emotional magnitude of what had just happened. He had just detonated his family, and while it was necessary, the fallout was still landing all around him. I pulled up a chair and sat in front of Richard. I didn't say anything at first. In these moments, silence is a tool. It gives people space to process. "The anniversaries," Richard said finally, his voice hoarse. "Every year, on the date she said her parents died, we'd go to the beach. She'd throw a flower into the ocean. I bought her a locket with their fake pictures in it. Where did she even get those pictures?" "It doesn't matter," I said softly. "What matters is what you do now. Right now, you are in shock. The anger will come. The grief will come. You have to grieve the woman you thought you married. You have to grieve the life you thought you had, because that person and that life never existed. They were an illusion. He looked at me, his eyes swimming with a pain so deep it was hard to look at. How could I have been so stupid? For 20 years? This has nothing to do with intelligence, Richard, I said, leaning in. You're not stupid. You're trusting. You're a fixer. You saw a woman who you thought was a wounded bird, and you spent 2 decades trying to build a safe nest for her. That's not a flaw in your character. It's a strength. But a master manipulator knows how to turn your strengths into weapons against you. They use your compassion to control you, your loyalty to isolate you, and your trust to deceive you. You were played by a professional. I turned to Caleb. Caleb, you okay? He gave a small, jerky nod, not looking up from his phone. I said to him, your mother is going to try to get to you. She's going to call. She's going to text. She's going to tell you that you betrayed her. She's going to say that I manipulated you. She will try to make you feel so guilty that you'll come back to her side just to stop the pain. You have to be ready for that. He looked up, a flicker of fear in his eyes. What do I do? For now, you don't do anything, I said. You let your dad handle the communication. Your only job right now is to start healing, to start figuring out who you are outside of that dynamic. We have a therapist for you to talk to, someone who specializes in this. Your voice has been silenced for a long time, and it's time you learned how to use it for yourself, not for her. Then I turned back to Richard. This was the most important part of the conversation. This was the warning that could save his life. Richard listened to me very carefully. You are about to experience something we call an extinction burst. Right now, Julianne is in a state of narcissistic injury. Her supply, your fear, your confusion, Caleb's loyalty has been cut off. She is not going to go away quietly. She is going to escalate. The behavior you have seen for the last 20 years is going to look like a picnic compared to what is coming. She will become more manipulative, more desperate, more vicious. She may threaten to hurt herself. She may make false allegations against you to the police. She will try every tool in her toolbox to pull you back into the drama because your chaos is her oxygen. He looked overwhelmed. So what do? I have to divorce her. I have to deal with the house, the money she stole. Yes, you do. And we have resources for you. We have a legal expert who will consult with you free of charge. But your primary job is to become a gray rock. Do you know what that means? It means you become the most boring, unresponsive person on the planet. You communicate only through lawyers. You don't answer her calls. You don't respond to her baiting text. You give her nothing. No emotion, no anger, no love, no hate. You give her nothing for her to feed on. A narcissist cannot survive in a vacuum. You have to create that vacuum. I could see the weight of it all pressing down on him. It was one thing to have the truth revealed on a TV stage. It was another to realize that the confrontation was just the first battle in a very long war. I can't believe this is my life, he whispered. It is, I said, not unkindly, it is your life. And today is the day you start taking it back. The only thing worse than living in this prison for 20 years is living in it for 20 years and one more day. Today is that day. You're out. You're free. It doesn't feel like it right now because freedom is scary when all you've known is the cage, but you are out, you and your son, and you're going to walk out of this studio tonight and you're going to start over. And my team is going to be with you every step of the way. We sat for a few more minutes. I made sure they had the contact information for the hotel, For the therapist? For the legal aid? I saw a flicker of resolve start to build in Richard's eyes, replacing the shock. I saw Caleb put his phone down and look at his dad, really look at him with a dawning sense of clarity. The road ahead was a minefield, but at least now they knew where the mines were buried. They were no longer walking blind. As I left them with my producer to go over the final logistics, I walked past Julianne's green room. The door was ajar. I glanced in. She was on the phone, her back to me. Her voice was no longer the icy, controlled whisper from the stage. It was syrupy, sweet, and it was laced with tears I knew for a fact were not real. He's turned my own son against me, she was saying into the phone, likely to her sister or some other person she was about to triangulate. Dr. Phil ambushed me. It was horrible. I don't know what to do. I'm all alone. She was already spinning the new narrative. The show wasn't an intervention, it was an attack. Caleb wasn't liberated, he was kidnapped. Richard wasn't a victim, he was a co-conspirator. The story had changed, but her role in it remained the same. The perfect, tragic victim. It was a chilling reminder that you can show someone the truth, you can hand them a map out of their self-made prison, but you cannot force them to walk through the door. Some people would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. And Julianne had just reappointed herself queen of her own private, miserable hell. People often think the show is the destination. It's not. The show is the starting line. It's the moment you draw a line in the sand and say, the life I was living ends today. But the hard part, the real work, begins the moment the cameras are off and you're sitting in a quiet hotel room with the wreckage of your life in a suitcase at your feet. That's when the real fight begins. It's not a fight against the other person anymore. It's a fight against your own history, your own programming, and the ghost of the reality you used to believe in. I checked in with Richard and Caleb every few days for the first few weeks. The initial calls were rough. Richard sounded like a man who had just washed up on shore after a shipwreck. He was alive, but he was disoriented, exhausted, and every muscle ached. They were staying in a corporate apartment my team had arranged, a sterile, impersonal place that felt nothing like a home. But that was the point. It was neutral ground. It was a place with no history, no ghost in the closets, no hidden wallets in shoeboxes. She's blowing up my phone, Phil, he told me on one call, his voice ragged, hundreds of texts a day. 1 minute, she's begging me to come home, telling me she can't live without me. The next, she's telling me she's hired the most vicious divorce lawyer in the state, and she's going to take me for everything I've got, which is funny since she's the one who has all the money. That's the cycle, Richard, I reminded him. The push and the pull, the love bombing and the threatening. It's designed to keep you off balance. Don't engage, block her number. All communication goes through the lawyer we connected you with, period. I know, he said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. But it's hard. 20 years of reacting to her, and now I have to not. And Caleb, she's sending him pictures of when he was a little boy, pictures of the three of us at Disney World. The captions say things like, "Remember when we were a happy family before he tore us apart?" She's not trying to win Caleb back, I explained. She's trying to punish him. That's not a memory, it's a weapon. She's trying to weaponize his own childhood against him to generate guilt. How is he handling it? Better than me, I think, Richard admitted. The therapist you guys set him up with, Dr. Evans, he's great. Caleb's been going twice a week. He told me yesterday that Dr. Evans called it hoovering, trying to suck him back into the drama. He showed me the text, and then he blocked her number. He said, "I can't do this anymore, Dad." I was so proud of him, I almost cried. That was a huge step. For a child who has been conditioned to be his mother's emotional caretaker, setting a boundary like that is like moving a mountain. It's an act of profound self-preservation. It meant the therapy was working. It meant the boy was starting to build a sense of self separate from his mother's needs. But as I predicted, Julianne's extinction burst went into overdrive. When the direct manipulation of Richard and Caleb failed, she went public. She started a blog, a beautifully designed, professional-looking blog with soft-focus photos of her looking pensive and sad. The title was The Survivor's Voice. In it, she wrote eloquent, heartbreaking posts about being a victim of a narcissistic husband and a corrupt television industry. She never mentioned my name or the show, but she didn't have to. She detailed, with her usual forensic precision, fabricated instances of Richard's abuse. She wrote about how her confused son had been brainwashed by his father. She was a master storyteller, and she was building a new narrative for a new audience, an audience that didn't have access to the bank records or the truth. People are believing her, Richard told me, his voice tight with anger. She's posting it all over the town's Facebook page. People I've known for years, guys I coach Little League with, they're looking at me funny at the grocery store. Someone keyed my truck last week, and that's the goal, I said. It's a smear campaign. When she couldn't control you, she decided to try and control how the world sees you. She's isolating you again, but this time on a community level. What did your lawyer say? He told me to ignore it. He said it's slander, but engaging with it would just give her more ammunition. He said, we have the truth on our side, and that will come out in court. He keeps telling me to be a gray rock. It's the hardest damn thing I've ever had to do, Phil, to stand there and let someone torch your reputation and just do nothing. Doing nothing is doing something. Richard, I insisted. It's the most powerful thing you can do. You are starving the fire of oxygen. Right now, it feels like it's burning out of control. But without your reaction, it will eventually burn itself out. Focus on what you can control, your work, your new apartment, and your relationship with Caleb. That was where the real progress was happening. In the quiet moments, away from the drama, Richard told me that for the first week, he and Caleb barely spoke. They coexisted in the apartment like polite strangers, circling each other, unsure of the new rules. Richard was afraid of saying the wrong thing, and Caleb was carrying the weight of his mother's betrayal. Then, one night, Richard was trying to cook dinner and set off the smoke alarm. It was a disaster, he told me, and for the first time, I heard him laugh. The chicken was charcoal. The smoke was so thick you couldn't see. And Caleb just came into the kitchen, looked at the mess, and started laughing. Not a mean laugh, a real belly laugh. And then I started laughing. We just stood there in this smoky kitchen, laughing like idiots, and then we ordered a pizza. And we ate it on the floor, and we talked, really talked, for the first time, maybe ever. That was the breakthrough. Not the one on stage under the lights, but the one in a smoky kitchen over a cheap pizza. That was the moment of father and son, free from the suffocating presence of the manipulator, found each other again. They started to build a new relationship, one not based on secrets and alliances, but on shared, simple truths. The chicken was burned. The pizza was good. The smoke alarm was loud. The legal battle was ugly. Julianne, as expected, filed for an emergency restraining order, claiming Richard was a threat. She submitted her blog post as evidence. The judge, a smart woman who had seen it all, took one look at the actual bank records. Richard's lawyer provided the one showing the systematic transfer of hundreds of thousands of dollars into Julianne's secret account, and threw her petition out. Every legal move she made was a desperate Hail Mary, and every one of them failed because they were built on a foundation of lies. The truth as it often does, had a stubborn way of asserting itself when placed under legal scrutiny. One of the last times I spoke with Richard during that intense period, he sounded different. The frantic, cornered energy was gone. His voice was calmer, deeper. You know, it's funny, he said. For 20 years, she told me I was bad with money, that I was forgetful, that I was incompetent. I believed her. Since I've been on my own, I haven't lost my keys once. I've paid every bill on time. I even set up a new budget, and it turns out I'm actually pretty damn good with money. It's like I'm meeting myself for the first time at 48 years old. And that right there is the end goal. That is the point of all of this, to peel back the layers of lies that someone else has painted on you and to rediscover the person you were before the poison set in. It's not about revenge. It's not about winning. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back your own mind, your own reality, your own life. Julianne was still out there writing her sad stories on the internet, the star of her own tragic opera. But Richard and Caleb had stopped listening. They had walked out of the theater and were learning to write their own story. And for the first time, it was a story they could believe in. It's been about a year since Richard and Julianne sat on my stage. We do follow-ups on many of our most intense cases, not just for the television audience, but for my own understanding of whether an intervention truly takes root. You can plant a seed, but you can't make it grow. The will to change has to come from within. I often say that you can't change what you don't acknowledge, and this family was a living, breathing case study in that principle. I spoke with Richard last week. The man on the phone was not the same man who had sat shaking in my studio. The frantic, hunted energy was gone, replaced by a calm, steady resonance in his voice. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. As I suspected, Julianne's legal strategy was a scorched earth campaign built on the same lies she'd told on my stage. But in a court of law, unlike the court of public opinion, evidence matters. The bank records, the testimony from her own sister, and a court-ordered psychological evaluation painted a picture so clear that her claims of abuse and financial mismanagement were dismissed. The judge saw the financial deception for what it was. She didn't get the house. She didn't get alimony. She got her secret bank account and a court order to stay away from Richard and Caleb. Richard sold the house. I had to fill, he told me. Walking through those rooms, it was like walking on a movie set after the film has wrapped. Nothing was real. Every memory I had in that place was tainted. It wasn't a home, it was a stage for a play that had closed. He and Caleb moved into a smaller townhouse across town. They're fixing it up together. Caleb is learning how to hang drywall, Richard said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I taught him how to use a miter saw last weekend. The kid is a natural. For years, Julianne told me he was too fragile, too sensitive to be around tools or loud noises. She told me I was stressing him out. But he's not fragile. He's strong. He's capable. We never had the chance to find that out. The silence in this new house, Phil. It's the best sound I've ever heard. It's not an empty silence. It's a peaceful silence. The noise is finally gone. Caleb is a freshman in college now, studying engineering at the State University just an hour away. He comes home most weekends. He and Richard go fishing. They work on the house. According to Richard, Caleb's anxiety, which had plagued him his entire life, has all but disappeared. He's on the dean's list. He has a girlfriend. He's living the life of a normal 19-year-old, a life that was stolen from him for 17 years while he was forced to be an emotional hostage in his own home. He made a choice on my stage. He chose the painful, terrifying truth over the familiar, comfortable lie. And that choice set him free. He still sees his therapist not because he is broken, but because he is committed to staying healthy. He's learning to trust his own perceptions, to build boundaries, and to understand that a parent's love should be a safe harbor, not a battlefield. As for Julianne, her story takes a darker, more predictable turn. She did not get help. She did not call the specialist we recommended. Instead, she doubled down. She retreated further into the fictional world she had created. Her blog, The Survivor's Voice, is still active. It has become her entire world, a digital echo chamber where she is the perpetual martyr and Richard is the eternal villain. She has a small, devoted following of people who see their own grievances reflected in her polished, tragic prose. She is curating her own mythology of martyrdom because it is the only identity she has left. From what her sister Rebecca told us, she has no real-world contact with anyone who knows the truth. She has alienated everyone. She lives in a small apartment paid for by the money she siphoned from Richard over the years. That money is her last remaining connection to the life she destroyed, and when it runs out, I don't know what she will do. We reached out to her, of course, to invite her to be a part of the follow-up. We felt she deserved the opportunity to tell her side of the story. 1 year later, we received an email back from her a few days later. It was not a note. It was not a refusal. It was simply a link to her latest blog post. The title was, How to Survive Betrayal by Those You Love Most. I clicked on it. It was a masterpiece of revisionist history, a self-pitying screed in which she was the noble victim of a grand conspiracy orchestrated by an abusive husband, a treacherous son, and a manipulative media figure. She was no longer living in reality at all. She was living in the comment section of her own blog. And that is the ultimate tragedy. Richard and Caleb escaped the prison. They walked out into the sunlight, blinked, and started the painful process of healing their eyes to see the world as it is. But Julianne is still inside. She has barred the doors, covered the windows, and is trying to convince herself that the darkness is actually light. She would rather be the queen of a prison of her own making than a citizen in the messy, unpredictable world of truth. You can't save someone who is determined to drown. You can throw them a life raft, but you can't force them to grab hold. In the end, this story wasn't about a monster and a victim. It was about a choice. The choice between a reality that is painful and a fantasy that is poisonous. Richard and Caleb chose reality. They are building a new life, a smaller, simpler life, but one built on a foundation of truth. And a small house built on truth will stand forever, while a mansion built on a foundation of lies will always, always crumble to dust. The most expensive thing you will ever own is a lie, because you have to spend the rest of your life paying for it.